let's just design the perfect offensive lineman for a second.
Perfect. Good morning. Happy Tuesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. All right. A very busy and somewhat stressful week this week. So this is actually our last week at iFast 2.0. So we've been in this building for 14 years. We're moving to a new location, bigger place, lots more space. So a little bit stressful. So we're going to dig straight into today's Q&A. And this was with Larry. Larry had some questions about working with offensive linemen because it's not something he's terribly familiar with. He's got some friends that do work with offensive linemen, and I think he wants to be able to invest in that situation as well. So we talked a lot about how we would construct this perfect offensive lineman. So this is an interesting situation where we're talking about recapturing ranges of motion. We're talking about the negative consequences of increased force production. And under these circumstances, it's the actual opposite end of the spectrum. We're in situations where we actually want to reduce some of the ability to turn. We want to increase the ability to produce high forces because these athletes are going to be very specifically structured in a certain way. So we're going to be biased towards wide ISAs. They're going to be biased towards high pressure strategies and such. And so again, an interesting conversation because we're skewing everything towards performance under these circumstances. So it'll be useful for many of you. If you'd like to participate in a 15-minute consultation, please go to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com. Put 15-minute consultation in the subject line so I don't delete it, and we'll arrange that at our mutual convenience. Everyone have an outstanding Tuesday, and I will see you later.
Camera is rolling. Clock has started. What is your question, Larry?
Okay, so I kind of talked to you a little bit on the emails, but I was talking to a friend of mine, and we got into conversation of your model or some of the things like that, and then he told me, that he trains offensive tackles, in particular offensive tackles, from every level, from NFL. He's working with several guys in the NFL right now, college, and even younger.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned to him the video that you had done with can't think of her name, but in any event, she works with pro pitchers. Or
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And y'all were kind of going through some of the faults that she was seeing, and you were kind of explaining in your model, what she was seeing, that hop that they were. I don't remember how you broke it down, right?
Yeah.
So, I was telling him that, and I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, I'd really like to be able to, kind of get an idea of what maybe the faults that I'm seeing or the positional and deficiencies." And so I talked to him again last night, and I said, just, can you give me a few faults that you see or positional errors that you see? And, one of the things he said was, first thing he said is what he said, it's like the guy, because I sent him your video. There was a video that you just briefly touched on, big people like offensive linemen, right? You don't want them to turn. They don't want to be turned, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to balance that with also giving them enough cushion or enough external rotation to be able to have the space, to be more durable, I suppose, to have more relative motion. And you can correct me on that. But
they have to be able to, hang on. They do have to be able to absorb some force.
Right.
Okay. But generally speaking, if they turn easily,
right,
they don't really have a job.
Yeah.
Because that makes them turn like a door,
Exactly.
And the last thing you want to do is have your left tackle and a right-handed quarterback get turned, and then your quarterback's, counting clouds in the sky, and then wondering why his back hurts. So you got to be careful with that. But there's certainly an element of that. But from a priority standpoint, from a positioning standpoint, when we're talking about the performance aspect of things, the turn is not the highest of priorities.
Okay. Well, one thing he did invent was it's a little handle. It has some bars that come up like this, and you hold it like that, but it's got things to attach attachments on the outside that are basically trying to pull the guy while he, resists. So, but one of the things that he said is, well, two things that I think, relevant to the positional faults is, one, he said that if they get stood up or extended, right, that they basically lost,
Yes,
right? They've
correct.
lost.
That is correct.
And, so he said, so I don't know if I need to be doing more core work or
No,
whatever.
no,
So I knew that wouldn't
that's
be
not the problem. That's
Yeah.
not the problem. That's
The
not
other
problem.
thing he said is that when they get pushed, when they get that initial contact and they're being pushed backwards, they will, let's say it's a right tackle or right offensive tackle, and it's the defensive end, right? That they will take a step back with their right leg, right? And that's another thing where he said, if they can't hold, if their knee goes out, if they get into valgus, right, that they've also lost. So meaning, the way I look at it is they've lost the inside of their foot, big first man had heel. Is that correct or incorrect?
Okay, so let's just design the perfect offensive lineman for a second.
Perfect. Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Big wide dude. Okay.
Yep.
Flat as a pancake, front to back.
So very compressed A to P.
Right. So that takes away his turns. Now, here's the thing that's going to happen here. Okay. So I want a big, strong guy. I want a guy that produces a lot of force. And so these are the guys where you go, okay, we're going to bench press you and we're going to back squat you and all that cool stuff. Right.
Right.
Because that's useful to create that type of a physical structure.
Correct.
It's also beneficial in that this is not a guy that I'm concerned with like the deepest possible squat. The offensive lineman is always going to be performing in this position that keeps him really close to max P.
Yeah.
Because he has to. Because
it looks like the bottom of a squat, right? I mean, it's
not the bottom of a squat.
Not the squat bottom at 90 degrees.
It's the sticking point is what it is, right?
Yeah.
So this is IR, this is high pressure, this is a concentric anterior pelvic outlet, this is orientation into external rotation, and then a compensatory strategy to drive internal rotation. They are not going to do this with your so-called normal relative motions, okay?
Right.
Because again, it's like the high mobility is a detriment in this case, because again, I need to be able to hold my positions, right? So when you talk about like the upper extremity positions,
Yeah.
Where it looks like they're supinating.
Right.
All right. That is the equivalent to a wide stance squat with the toes pointing outward. So what they do is they have to create a position that allows them to capture their arm and lower extremity position. And it's going to be an ER orientation. They create an IR orientation. So they're going to be anteriorly oriented in the pelvis. They're going to be anteriorly oriented in the thorax. And that's what's going to allow them to bring their hands back into position. So they don't want their hands out wide because they open themselves up to physical contact. That's where they get stood up.
Okay.
Okay. And then they get pushed into a space where they can't produce any force. They literally get lifted away from the ground. I want to stay as close to the ground as I can within a range that allows me to produce maximum force into the ground, so I can produce maximum force forward, because that's where my opponent is.
Right.
So they are actually creating orientations to produce high levels of force, because you got 200-300 pound bodies that are pushing against one another, right? And again, so if I don't stay in that IR downward force position, all I do is get lifted up and I get beat.
Right.
And then that's where I do have some relative motion to give up. And then that's where I get turned. Right.
Right.
So again, if you look at you take a snapshot of a lineman in position, it's like you see a lot of 90-degree angles.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But these are orientations to allow them to produce maximum force. So they work in a very, very small range of motion. So number one, they have to be able to capture the position. Number two, they have to be able to produce force in that position. They need to be able to produce force very, very quickly in that position. And then they need to be able to produce force very, very quickly, repeatedly in that position. That's how you train an offensive lineman.
Right.
And whatever fits that bill, there you go. that is all useful.
Right. So it's kind of like the videos I sent you there. It's kind of hit, relax, you know, and some of the sled activities they were doing, I guess.
Well, so we have a time constraint too. So think about this for a second. So the average football play is somewhere between 4 and 7 seconds. I don't know what the current number is, but that'll get you in the ballpark, right?
Right.
So they have to sustain an output, a very high output for a short period of time, and then do that repeatedly. So worst case scenario, 2-minute drill where you're trying to run plays back to back to back to back to back as quickly as possible in a very short period of time, right? So they're going to be able to need to do that. So they're going to be trained to produce high levels of force for 4 to 6 seconds. I'm going to do it again and again and again and again, right? So their typical constraint would be 6 seconds off. And I don't know, was it 25 seconds in college? And then 35 seconds in the pros. I haven't.
You mean between plays?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So again, so you have that type of an interval that you have to be able to consistently produce high levels of performance. And then again, like the exceptions to the rule would be like a 2-minute drill where they don't have full recoveries and they need to be trained for that as well. And so again, that's just the element. It's like, can they acquire the position that allows them to produce the maximum force under the circumstances? And this is beyond technique, right? I mean, it's hand-to-hand combat,
right?
You know, so all of those elements come into play, but that's more of the technical side, not so much the strength and conditioning side, if you will.
Right.
Our main concern is, can they acquire the positions? Can they produce the force? Can they do it quickly? And can they do it over and over and over and over again? And that's how I would prepare them.
So the ability to acquire the position would require just enough external rotation to be able to acquire the position, right?
Correct.
But not so much that they can't produce force into the ground.
Correct. Yeah. So if I give them too much distributed external rotation, so like an early propulsive representation or something like that, if I give them too much of that, that becomes very, very difficult for them to control because it's a lower force producing position. I want them in a very high producing position. That's why you see, when you see them performing, you see positions that look a lot like a box squat.
Yeah.
Because that's where pressure is highest internally. That's where the concentric orientation is most magnified. That's where I have a pelvic outlet that is pushing upward to create as the highest pressure possible, so I can push into the ground and then push into my opponent. Because I have to hold this position. If I give way too much, and again, technical aspects aside, there are certain ways that they will automatically give way because it gives them a mechanical advantage. But point being is like when I'm talking about the force production element of being an offensive lineman, it's like I have to be able to capture that and then produce the force.
Well, so it sounds to me almost a little bit like a power lifter.
Yeah. I
mean, you got to have just enough enough motion to be able to get down and get the lights.
Okay, but here's the difference. The difference. Okay, the first two elements are like a power lifter. So can you capture the position? Can you produce the force? Powerlifters don't really have a time constraint. So if I do an 800-pound squat and it takes me 10 seconds to perform it, it still counts. Okay.
Right.
If I'm an offensive lineman, I don't have that kind of time.
Right.
Right. I have to do it in a very, very narrow window of time, and I have to be able to do it over and over and over again. So, a powerlifter, does his max effort lift, and then he goes over and he sits down for a while so he can fully recover, so he can be ready for his next lift. Offensive lineman does not have that luxury, which is probably why you wouldn't see the same magnitude of force capabilities. It's still very, very high. Don't get me wrong. It's like those guys are strong. There's no question about that. But I'm going to sacrifice some max force production, like as an offensive lineman. If I can squat 500-600 pounds versus 800 pounds, but I can produce that force much, much faster, and I can do it over and over and over again. There's my advantage as an offensive lineman versus just being a pure power lifter. So there are elements that would be similar and beneficial, but you got to start you always have to think the athletic element of it, because again, you start to throw a time constraint into things. That's power output. So that's force times distance per unit time. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And then I have to superimpose the endurance on top of that. So now, how many times can I produce that same measure of power output?
Okay.
Okay.
With respect to, losing position in terms of just being pushed into extension, right? And the need to avoid that. And what you said, that's not, we talked, you said that's definitely not core. That's something else. What is the something else? What is it that?
It's the ability to push down force. It's just downforce, right?
Okay.
And I won't say that the trunk's not important, right?
Yeah.
But all I have to do is have a mechanical advantage against you where my force is below yours and moving upward, right?
Right.
And as soon as I have gained that mechanical advantage, I have lifted you off the ground. So you can no longer push into the ground.
Right.
Right. So I've moved you into a space away from your highest force producing capabilities. To say it's something that's isolated, that it's one thing, would be ridiculous.
Right.
Right. It doesn't negate the importance of some aspect of training, but to say, oh, it's this, it's like, no, it's not. It could be a technical glitch, right? It could be that you came out of your stance 5 degrees taller than you were last time because you're too tired to hold your position. That's why I'm talking about capture the position, produce force there, do it quickly, and then do it over and over and over again, because fatigue accumulation reduces your ability to do those things. So if I'm too tired to assume the optimal position and I get lifted up, is that core strength? No, it's just fatigue that doesn't allow me to capture the position in the first place.
Right.
Right.
So I don't know about, I'm going to speculate here because I know nothing about the position. My son played football until high school, but he was always defensive back or running back. He wasn't playing the line. But this position, I'm assuming what the offensive line is trying to do is what you just said, is get up under the pads and lift that guy up so he's not applying force into the ground.
Correct.
As well.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. If I move you out of your ideal force producing position, I win. So whether we're talking about sumo wrestling, offensive lineman against defensive lineman, a wrestler versus another wrestler, it doesn't matter. Same thing, same rules, right? I want to take you out of your force producing position and I want to gain the mechanical advantage under all circumstances.
Yeah. It's kind of like the old saying, low man's wins. You hear that sometimes.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, absolutely. Does that help you, sir?
Yes, it does. Just quickly,
go ahead.
The valgus knee. What would be some corrections for that, or is that just?
So a valgus knee is an attempt to increase the amount of IR proximally. So as I anteriorly orient more and more and more, it actually creates a turn in the spine.
Okay.
It turns the spine towards the midline. So if I have a right valgus knee, that means the spine is turning to the left in an attempt to create more downward force. And I have to move the knee into that position to create the down force. That's what's going on there.
Right. And what would be a correction for that? I mean, what would be some activities?
Again, it's like we have to look at this from the circumstances. Can they even achieve the optimal position first?
Okay.
And then train force production in that position.
Gotcha.
It's not a matter of like, oh, we have to correct something. Like this might be an element of training that needs to be addressed first and foremost. Can they capture the position?
So some forms of box or variations of box squats, it seems like would be a.
I love box squats for offensive linemen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's it's a force producing position they're going to use. And again, it allows them to train the time related aspect of the power output. Larry, I hate to be rude. You need to go. Okay.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Have a great day.